Hi, everybody, and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar at Purdue University. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Chris Caniff. Chris was an undergraduate here. I met him many years ago when he was working with Professor Sonia Fahmy, and he went on to do great things. He got a PhD at the University of California in San Diego, and he just recently started as an assistant professor at UIC. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chris. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christina. Hi, everybody. I'm here to understand or explain a little bit today about the economics of sending spam. As Christina mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at University of Illinois Chicago in the computer science department. And so here we go. So this is a computer science talk. I am a computer science professor. And so a fine question would be, why are we going to be talking about economics over the course of this talk as opposed to computer science? So we understand a lot within computer security about the technical mechanisms that underlie the guarantees that we can provide one way or another of security or insecurity for a given system. And so we can say if an attacker has a certain capability, they're going to be able to break or not going to be able to break a given defense. But modern adversaries, in many cases, are motivated by the economic mechanisms, not the technical mechanisms. Like, they're motivated by the fact that crime can pay. And so effective defenses should not only fully take into consideration the technical mechanisms involved, but also the profit motive of the attacker. And understanding the business processes behind how these attackers are actually making money, putting dollar bills in their pocket, is a really important first step to fully understanding what this attacker is doing and what their capabilities are. Now, to understand the rest of this talk, I'm going to give you a really quick overview of how we view a modern spam campaign. Now, a modern spam campaign has three different moving parts, three different entities that we're going to talk about. The first one is the marketers. The marketers here are the spammers. They're the ones that are sending out messages where it's some spam message that says, oh, here, you want to buy some Viagra, go to this website. And so in many cases, this is a spam-based email, but it can also be unsolicited Facebook friend requests or group requests, or spam going out through Twitter or through search engine optimization and search engine manipulation. Because we're talking about this at this wide angle, we don't really care too terribly much about what the vector is, whether it's an email message or a Twitter message or whatever have you. Now, these marketers are sending these email messages or any sort of advertisement toward end users on the internet. And when these end users are receiving these messages, they're not receiving just one or two, they're receiving a whole bunch of them. And so this way you end up with a bunch of spam messages in your inbox, or maybe the search results when you search for something on Google has a bunch of spam links in it, or maybe you aren't going to be able to make any sense of your Twitter feed because there's so many different spammers trying to push their advertisements into that stream. Now, what the marketers hope is that when the users receive these advertisements, some subset of them are going to go on and actually decide, oh, hey, I do want to buy this thing that's been advertised to me. That's what the marketers hope. And then if the users are actually going to do this, in modern spam campaigns, they aren't going to be talking directly back to that marketer. The marketer, their job is exactly that, marketing. They send these advertisements out. They don't have to worry about the back end of actually fulfilling that demand. So there's actually this third player, the merchants, who are in charge of receiving the payments, receiving the traffic that the marketers have created, and then actually taking the credit card transactions for those end users. And what their core competency there is actually fulfilling those orders and then paying out the business expenses of running this spam-based merchant business, this economy here. So what they have to do is they have to take a bunch of credit card transactions, and then they have to actually ship you what it is that they're trying to sell you, and I'll tell you more about why they actually have to ship that later on in the talk. So these are the three different entities that we're going to focus on during this talk today. And the first one we're going to look at are the marketers who are delivering the spam, and they receive a commission based on how many actual sales that they elicit. Now, the business model for this marketer is not something that's fundamentally new to us. nowadays. Spam is just an advertisement where they're advertising the goods that are for sale. The business model is direct marketing, the same as Sears or anybody else, or LL Bean, who is sending you a catalog in the mail. They worry about how much revenue that they're bringing in, what the success rate is of their advertisements, and how much it costs them to deliver that advertisement. So in the traditional, in the real world of direct marketing, it costs maybe $1.50 to send out that LL Bean catalog. They hope that 1 in 100 people makes a actual purchase after they receive that catalog for free. And then if that purchase is, $150 or greater, in that 1%, then you can say, oh, they're breaking even. This is, a revenue neutral or positive revenue successful marketing campaign. And so that would be what would happen in the real world. What we're going to look at here today is looking at this for spammers. We're going to characterize this revenue, give you a decent idea about what the conversion rate is, what the success rate is, and what the gross revenues are for these spammers. So what we want to know here is just how much money that they're making and where they are making this money from. So modern spam in many cases is delivered by botnets. These are networks of compromised machines out there in the internet that are all communicating possibly with each other, possibly with some third party somewhere else. And the fundamental thing here is that the pro to using a botnet, which is somebody else's machine, is that you're kind of getting something for nothing. You're getting this free computation, free network access, because it's somebody else's machine that they don't know that they're compromised. But the con for the actual botnet is that they have to trust this machine that's under the physical control of someone else to do their bidding. And they can't perfectly trust this machine if they don't have it secure. It's fundamentally insecure because this is something that's already been infected by that end user. So the specific botnet I'm going to talk about today is the Storm botnet, which was a relatively high profile, very noisy botnet that had its heyday back in about 2007, 2008. There was one industry company who estimated that 1 out of every 5 spam mail that was being sent at that point in time was being sent by the Storm botnet. And so this is obviously a very high profile, very noisy botnet. And another funny little industry information, like tidbit that you got out of the professional press then was saying, okay, well, if you take the number of nodes in this botnet and you multiply it by what the average computational power is of a current desktop machine, you could actually say that the Storm botnet was one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world had it been used to actually perform distributed computation. So it was definitely a big player at this point in time, sending a lot of spam. And one thing that I'm going to explain coming up here is that it had a unique architecture that allowed us to infiltrate this botnet and observe the spam campaign from the spammer's point of view. So the architecture of the Storm botnet looked basically like this, where you have a set number of what we called master servers, which are just servers out there on the internet that are in charge of sending commands down to the individual infected machines that are sending the spam messages. But where a traditional botnet will only have 1 tier of infected machines, this one was actually using 2 tiers of infected machines, where certain bots, these worker bots, they're the ones that do the traditional botnet style work, where they're sending spam, they're collecting email addresses from address books, they are sometimes even sending distributed denial of service attacks. But then there's also this second layer of proxy bots, where they receive the same malware executable, they are part of the same botnet, but instead of sending any spam, sending any DDoS attacks, all that they're in charge of is ferrying commands from a worker bot up to the master server and back again. So what will happen here is that when a worker bot wants to say when a worker bot becomes infected, it finds a proxy bot using a peer-to-peer overlay to find these proxy nodes, and then it sends a message through that proxy bot saying, for instance, I've just started running and I need a load of spam to send. The master server receives this message and then sends back a response that encodes a set of instructions for sending 500 to 1,000 spam messages. This will include an email template that gets filled with some random information so that it can evade spam filters. And it also includes a list of email addresses to send to and a list of URLs to add as the advertised link in that spam message. So after these worker bots receive this set of instructions, they generate the spam messages that they were instructed to generate, and they send those out to the end users that are targeted by this botnet. And then after they sent this set of emails out, they report back to the master server through that same proxy whether they were successful or not at getting that message delivered to the mail server that was in charge of that email address. Now, what we wanted to do with this botnet was view and modify the commands that were moving through these proxy bots so that we would be able to change what the commands were without actually having to be the machines that were in charge of sending out that spam. So our approach here was to infect virtual machines that we controlled with this malware, and we made sure that they were being instantiated as proxy bots so that they would ferry these commands back and forth with the bot master. And in order to do this, we had to build the GQ containment-based honey farm. This is an architecture that allows us to run a bunch of virtual machines within a network that we control. They're completely unmodified virtual machines running completely unmodified malware. But then what we can do is take a look at every flow that comes out of these pieces of malware. We can make a decision based on the flow, based on the content of that flow, whether we want to, say, allow that message to go out into the internet unmodified because it's, say, a command and control message, or we can also just as easily take a look at that message based on either where it's addressed or what the body of it is, and then say, oh, well, we'd like to change the contents of this message, but then fix up everything at the network layer so that the infected virtual machine thinks it's sending message A, the recipient of that message thinks it's receiving some other message that has been changed in some way, but they don't really know that the communication has been changed in flight. So this was the GQ containment honey farm that we used to modify these network flows that were going through these pieces of malware. We also had to reverse engineer the entire operation of this botnet, where we had to understand this spam templating language because it was a custom job that the spammer had cooked up. We had to understand their command and control protocol, which had both some primitive cryptography and an interesting custom content scrambling algorithm that made it trickier to understand what was going on, but definitely not impossible, as you'll see a little bit later on. So we were able to understand the semantics of this command and control protocol, and we were able to install some of these proxy bots within our containment-based honey farm. So these are virtual machines that we control. They join the botnet just as any other proxy bot would. And after they do this, the worker bots eventually start trying to make connections because they're saying, okay, well, I need you as a proxy to relay this message to the master server. So just as before, a worker bot will connect through one of our infected virtual machines and send the same message that says, oh, I'm ready to send a spam message. The master server will respond and say, okay, here's your template, here's your list of email addresses to target, and here's your list of URLs to put in the body of this message advertising this individual, for instance, a Viagra store. And so before that message gets sent down to the worker bot, if it goes through our proxy bots that we have infected in our network, we can actually change what URL is being advertised in these spam messages. So if an individual worker bot does not connect through one of our virtual machines, they will send the message that includes the spammer's desired link advertisement. However, the worker bots that do connect through our proxies are sending out spam messages to the same set of email addresses with the same types of obfuscation so that they can get through spam filters, but they include a different set of URLs. And that allowed us to have these worker bots send messages that advertise a server that we control. So the end result here is that the same email addresses receive spam messages had we not existed, but a different URL was being advertised at that point in time. And an important thing to note here is that our virtual machines are only proxying for approximately 1.5% of the entire network at that point in time. So it wasn't 1/3. It was more like a much smaller portion of the entire botnet at that point in time. So this allowed us to sample their entire campaign, but not have a very large and obvious effect on their bottom line or their operations. Now that we have this capability of watching spam messages get sent out and then eventually seeing the respondents come and take a look at the site that was advertised, we want to measure as much as we can here. What questions do we want to answer? So first, we want to see, okay, well, we don't just want to see the number of people that are coming to this site. We also want to see what they're going to do on this site. So we created 2 sites that mirrored the actual sites that were being advertised at that point in time. One of them, which was the self-propagation vector for this botnet, was an advertisement that said, oh, check out this funny joke. That advertisement would redirect you to a website that said, oh, if you want to see this funny joke, please click here. The click here asks you to download a program, and I guess you're supposed to expect that the program will tell you the joke. The joke is on you because then you become infected with the malware and you don't even get to see a joke, which I thought was kind of a bummer. So what happened was we created a site that did, from the outside, it did everything the same, but instead of infecting the end host's machine, it only sent back a phone home to our machine to say, oh, this program was run, and then did nothing else. The other spam campaign that was active at this point in time was selling pharmaceuticals online. We created a lookalike store that functioned basically the same way and was advertising the same products for the same prices, and we were able to track what products the end users were clicking through and what they were putting in their cart, and we tracked everything up to the point where they would actually click the buy now button and put in their personal information. At that point, we just said, oh, sorry, we're down for maintenance. But at that point, we get to say, okay, well, this is what they had in their cart when they decided they wanted to try to buy these products. So we modified the instructions that were being sent through our proxy bots so that these URLs were advertised in a small portion of the entire botnet's output. And we just did everything we could to make everything look as similar as possible, both at the network level and just at the visual level here, to remove any bias in our measurements. So now that we have this capability of measuring the conversion, the number of people that are actually going to come to this website and try to buy something or try to run a program that'll tell them a funny joke, you can think of the entire process between targeting thousands or even millions of email addresses, going all the way from there to, well, you have to, if you're going to target a certain email address, it's got to be a valid email address, and then that email has to get through the spam filter. Then that email has to not only get through the spam filter, but it actually has to be interesting enough to the end user that they're like, oh, I do want to read this. And then there's only going to be a smaller portion of people that are going to say, oh, well, I do want to try to buy some Viagra online. And then eventually at the other end of this conversion pipeline, as we call it, you're going to get a small percentage of people that are actually going to successfully convert on this advertisement. They're going to successfully buy something from this advertisement, thus justifying sending all of that mail in the first place. So let's work through that pipeline here. So at the very beginning of the pipeline, we can look at how many email addresses are targeted by the botnet during our experiment. So for the pharmaceutical spam campaign, there were about 350 million email addresses targeted. And for the funny joke campaign, there were about 125 million email addresses targeted. Now, as I said earlier, the bots not only attempt to send this message, they also report back to the botmaster whether or not they were successful at getting the mail accepted by the mail server in charge of receiving that mail. And so a full 3/4 of all these messages don't even get accepted by the mail servers that are in charge of this. So this is where either the email address is just invalid, or there's a behavioral blacklisting going on where a certain mail server will say, oh, I've seen this IP address, this host on the internet sending lots and lots of messages that get marked as spam. I'm just going to say any messages coming from that host, I'm going to say a priori, I'm not even going to read that message. I know it's going to be spam. I don't even want to spend any time processing it or receiving it. And there's a process. There's a functionality, a mechanism called DNS Based Blacklists, where you can check whether or not an individual IP address has been reported as sending a lot of spam before. And so we were actually able to collect all the information for a popular DNS-based blacklist at the same time as we were running this experiment. So we got to see, okay, what do these defenses look like to the attacker? And this graph here gives us a view from the attacker's point of view of how effective this IP-based blacklisting is for the Storm botnet. Now, this is an XY scatter of the delivery rate to a given domain based on whether or not the deliverer, whether or not the bot that was in charge of sending was on this DNS-based blacklist. So on the x-axis, you have bots which are not in this DNS-based blacklist, and the y-axis tells you their success rate after they have been added to a given blacklist. And as these are not dots, these are actually circles. The circle radius indicates how many addresses were targeted at a given domain. So this is where the larger circles are going to be free email providers, your Yahoo mails, your AOL mails, etc., things like this. And just as a really quick example, if we take a look at this circle here in the lower right-hand corner, you see that the radius is relatively large. So this is a reasonably highly targeted email domain in our data set. And before the bots are getting blacklisted, the delivery rate is very high. It's about 90%. So at this point, the delivery rate is really high. However, if a bot is on a blacklist, the delivery rate comes down to about 10%. So at this point, you can say this domain is probably relying on DNS-based blacklisting to prevent spam coming from botnets like so. And now there's a few trends that come out of this data. And one of them is that for a large swath of mostly smaller domains, there's a lot of just DNS-based blacklisting is not being used at this point to filter spam. There's very high deliverability before a bot gets added to the blacklist. There's very high deliverability after the bot gets added to the blacklist. It's not really making a difference. Likewise, down here at the origin, you see that there's some other effective filtering going on for these messages. Both before and after an individual IP gets added to the blacklist, the delivery rate is at or close to 0. This is where there's some other effective way for the botmasters or for the email providers to filter the mail coming from the Storm botnet. However, we also see this really strong trend out here where there's a lot of domains, mostly smaller, but some that are decent size, that are actually making good use of this DNS-based blacklisting, where before a given bot gets added to this blacklist, it's getting a decent amount of mail through, but afterwards, it's actually getting through a very low amount, and we can actually see the effectiveness of the DNS-based blacklisting at a global scale coming from an individual botnet. Now, moving on to the next step in this pipeline of getting a successful conversion, the next step is not only getting it accepted by that mail server, it's actually got to get presented to the user either in their inbox or possibly in their spam mailbox. We don't have a global view of this because, as I was saying earlier, this is the point of view of the spammer. They do not know what's going on in everybody's inboxes or what in everybody's spam mailboxes. The best they can do is take a look at what is coming into accounts that they own. They can try to spam themselves and say, oh, well, it got through to my test account, then maybe it was successful. We have a couple numbers for that, but that's elided for this talk. And then some subset of users, now that we have the message presented to the user, some small subset of those is going to actually be like, oh, I'm curious enough to actually click on this message. And for this, we do see the global result of what's going on here. So before, where we saw 350 million email addresses targeted for this pharmaceutical spam campaign, much less than 1/100% are actually coming to that site and even viewing it in the first place. Likewise, although a little bit higher, you've got a very, very low conversion rate for the postcard, the funny joke campaign there. And so if you want a successful conversion, you not only want them to visit this site, you want them to actually try to buy something or try to run this program to get them infected with the bot malware. So the conversion rate we saw here was, out of those 350 million targets, there were 28 end users that attempted to try to buy something from this online store. And then, again, a little bit higher conversion rate for the infection campaign was 541 out of over 100 million different targets actually deciding, oh, we do want to try to run this program. So if you do the division out, you can see that 1 in every 12 million of those spam messages actually resulted in a successful purchase in our hypothetical situation here. And so that's astronomically low, right? That you have to send 12 million different spam messages to expect one purchase for this individual spammer. However, if you take the visits number we have there and you divide that out by the conversions, this is the conversion from someone who's interested enough to click on a link to look at a web page to the number of people that are willing to, regardless of whether their operating system says, you downloaded this program from the internet, are you sure you want to run it? Or whether their antivirus says, oh, this program is unchecked or possibly malicious, do you still want to run it? They still decide that 1 in 10 of people is willing to run a program that just gets advertised to them from a complete stranger purporting to have a funny joke. So that's another interesting takeaway from this data set. Now, recall that earlier I was saying that we recreated this site as accurately as we could. And so we also got to see, what items were getting added to the shopping carts for these shoppers and how much they cost. So we actually got to come up with a hypothetical idea of how much money the spammer would be making in this case. And so the 28 hypothetical purchases that we saw accounted for about $100 per day of gross revenue for this section of the botnet. As I was saying earlier, this is 1.5% of the entire botnet. So if you extrapolate out the revenues for the entire botnet, you see they're making about a gross of $7,000 per day. And if this marketer is entitled to a 50% commission on all of these advertisements, which was at that point in time a very common commission split, they would be making a gross of $1.5 million per year as a spam-based marketer if they ran this campaign throughout the entire year. So you have astronomically low conversion rates. It's very, very low, but your volume does make up for it. There are enough people out there that want to buy these things that you might make a healthy amount of money there. So now that we have this capability, what can we use this understanding to? How can we use this understanding to make the situation a little bit better? Now, recall that we were looking at the spam templates because we were able to run these bots within our contained infrastructure. Not only could we run those proxy bots, we could also run the spamming bots within our containment architecture, and we could say, oh, if they're trying to send a mail, reflect it back to a different server on our own network so that we can see what message is coming out of that bot. And since this is all happening on our local network, we can control everything that's happening here. We can tell it, oh, just keep sending as much spam as you possibly can. Send it over and over and over again. And what we can do is actually come up with an idea of how to infer what that original template was without having to understand the actual language that it was written in or reverse engineer any of the botnet itself. So this containment-based honey farm allows us to run these. And then we also built this system called Botnet Judo, which takes lots and lots of instances of spam that we know are coming from the same exact botnet. And not only do we know it's coming from the same botnet, we also know that it's coming from the same template. And these templates are relatively simple. And so we can actually create these highly specific spam filters that are just regular expressions based off of what we've inferred that base template was. And that allows us to say, okay, well, we got a whole bunch of examples of spam messages. We can actually infer what the template would have looked like and use that to create a spam filter. Now, this spam filter is not a great spam filter. It's not even a good spam filter by most evaluations, because most evaluations are going to say, well, what percentage of all spam are you going to stop? Like, at this point, we're only going to stop, as I was saying, about 20% of all spam. Absolutely best case scenario if it's a super noisy botnet. But what's great about this is that we're going to have virtually no false positives because we have this regular expression that only matches outputs of this template. And so this allows us to say, this is safe enough to deploy in line as a spam filter based off of this information that we understand about the botnet by infiltrating it and understanding both their bottom line and how they're getting all these messages sent out. So this automatic filtering provides us with a effective, highly precise, but not fully covering way to block a whole bunch of spam without with virtually no false positives. Now that is the first section here, and that gives us an idea of what it looks like to be a marketer in this system. The next thing that we're going to focus on here is what it looks like to be a user. We're going to understand the demand that underlies this market, because if nobody wanted to buy Viagra online without a prescription, there wouldn't really be too much of a reason to actually send those advertisements out. So understanding a bit more about the demand that underlies this ecosystem is pretty important. So that previous approach where we're looking at it from the point of one bot master, we got to go really deep into the operations of one organization that was sending these spam messages in a certain way. We got to see millions and millions, hundreds of millions of different email addresses targeted, but we only got to see information about 28 purchases. That's a very small, it's 1.5% of one operation. The entire ecosystem is much, much larger than that. And so our goal for this section of the talk is to understand the global demand here. And in order to do this, we need to understand a bit more about the merchants and how that mechanism actually functions. And again, the way that we're going to pull the data out here is we're going to exploit some data leakages based on the bad guys using compromised machines as part of their infrastructure. And we're going to be able to synthesize an understanding of the demand distribution based on a limited amount of data that we opportunistically were able to collect over the course of our research. So a little bit more about the mechanism here of how these three entities are interacting. As we saw in the first section, there's marketers. They're sending lots and lots of advertisements. They're targeting these users. And then some subset of the users are going to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I do want to look at that advertisement. I do want to go to the website that was advertised here. And so they go to this website. They click on a few different things. Maybe they compare some products. They decide that okay, I know what I want to buy. I'm going to hit the checkout button. Once they have decided to make the purchase, they're no longer interacting with the marketer in any way. At this point, they are completely interacting with the merchant, because the merchant here has to take these credit card payments and then ship back the information and or ship back the products. I'm sorry. So these merchants are relatively well organized. This page here is a screenshot of one of the advertisements by the merchant advertising for marketers to advertise on behalf of that program. Now they're very polished. There's at least a dozen different relatively popular programs here, so they're competing for marketers because they want more people to advertise for them as opposed to some other merchant. And some of the qualities of this are that they offer high commission on sales, and very, very high, 30 to 60% of the gross revenue for individual sales going to that marketer. They offer you on-demand payment. You even have an iPhone app where you can say, oh, I have caused this many sales. I can ask them to deposit that to my bank account right now while I'm out on the town. They offer low drug prices so that you can actually compete against other merchants and have a lower price for your Viagra without a prescription. And they even give these merchants, the merchants give the marketers a lot of leeway, and maybe they can run their own shop where it looks different. They have lots of different pre-made templates so that they can say, oh, this template looks cooler, and so I want to use this to advertise my shop. And there's lots of things going on here. What the takeaway here is that these merchants are very aggressive at recruiting the marketers to advertise on their behalf, because they're running the back end of this business, and they rely on the high volume of lots of different marketers successfully sending these advertisements to different people. So these people that are receiving these advertisements, these are who we want to focus on at this point. Now, the questions we want to ask here are, where are these customers located, and what drugs do they want to buy? Ideally, we would have the full back-end database from these merchants, and we could just take a look at that all the way through. My research group was actually able to do exactly that and corroborated a few of the results that I'm going to present here. But in the absence of this ground truth information about their business operation, what can we infer from what is available to us? Now, we're going to go over the specifics of another online pharmacy. or on another one of these operations. And so here we have the affiliate, which is the marketer, who's going to send some marketing information to a user and hope that they actually go and browse to one of these sites. Now, the site itself within the Ava Pharmacy network is hosted by the marketer. The marketer hosts the site. They can tweak things how they want. But the images that are on this page are actually being loaded from compromised hosts somewhere else in the internet. And so this means that all of these hosts, so there's hundreds and hundreds of different affiliates. They run their own servers. We're not going to get a longitudinal idea looking at one or two of those servers. But if we're able to see all these image loads from one of these compromised image hosts, there were only on the order of half a dozen different hosts that were in charge of the images for the Ava Pharmacy network at this point in time. We were actually able to receive the web logs for a host that was in charge of about 20% of all image loads for the Ava Pharmacy affiliate network over about 5 days. So this isn't a smoking gun. This isn't everything we want to know, but we can infer based on these logs, okay, well, we know what images are being loaded on the landing page. We know what images are not going to be in the cache when the end user actually navigates to an individual page advertising a product. And finally, we can know what images will not be cached and be unique on the cart pages. So after recreating the structure of the site and understanding what images are going to be loaded when, we can actually create an understanding of everyone that is coming to this site that is loading images from the host that we have access to the logs from. So in the previous experiment, we actually got to see it was about 10,000 different visits and about 26 different purchases. In this instance, we actually get to see information about 750,000 distinct visitors to Ava Pharmacy sites and over 3,000 distinct items that the individual users wanted to purchase. So here we get to see what item they wanted and what the IP address was of the end user who was trying to select this product. So we got to see from where and what they desired and how much was desired comparatively. So we take a look at this data through just some simple geolocation of those IP addresses. We get to see that wherever there's human beings on the globe, there's people that are a little bit curious about this advertisement that they received in their email, which kind of makes sense, especially when you got 750,000 different visitors. But if you take a look at the purchases that actually, which subset of these users are actually trying to buy these things, there's a few trends that pop up here in North America and Western Europe. And in fact, 3/4 of all the customers for this online pharmacy are coming from the United States, and over 9 out of every 10 are coming from Western countries in general. Now, not only do we get to see where, but we also get to see what products it is that they are desiring. And this is a simple distribution of the different product categories as categorized by the affiliate program, by the merchant. And we see that the top of this distribution, there's things that one might consider to be recreational drugs. So here you see men's health, which is your Viagra's, your Cialis, these erectile dysfunction style drugs. And then interestingly, women's health does not mean what you or I might think it means at first glance. Women's health is almost exclusively Viagra style products marketed towards women, which is not a on-label use of these drugs, but this is not your pharmacist or your doctor recommending what to take. This is a marketer that has no FDA regulations to worry about. They're just going to advertise whatever it is they decide they want to try to sell to people. So 71% of these are kind of these types of things that you expect. Pain relief are things that are analogs to narcotics that have a propensity for abuse. So things like herbal Xanax is a popular thing in the pain relief category. But if you look at this, the remaining almost third of these are things that one might not typically think of as spam advertised pharmaceuticals. Popular things in here are allergy medicine, antibiotics, blood pressure medicine. These are drugs that people actually, they shouldn't need to go online to buy these things. These are things that they probably need just to go about their day. Now, if we cross-reference both where these purchases are coming from and what the demand is for, if we take a look at the orders that are not coming from the United States, we see that there's about a 10-to-1 ratio of desiring these recreational pharmaceuticals, your Viagra's, etc., to the non-recreational things like blood pressure medicine or antibiotics. However, if you look at the demand coming from within the United States, there's a very, very big difference here, where there's a 2-to-1 ratio of the recreational to the non-recreational drugs. Now, if you factor in the fact that the United States is a very large part of this demand overall, you're seeing that the U.S. visitors are 4 times more likely to select these non-recreational drugs than the other Western visitors. There could be a lot of reasons for this. One hypothesis could simply be that the healthcare regimes in these different nations have a market effect on whether or not someone is convinced that they should go to the internet to buy their medicines. Now that's taking a little bit of a closer look at the demand that's actually putting money in the pockets for these marketers and for these merchants. The final aspect of this talk, we're going to go over the merchants themselves, and we're going to actually take a look at not only one marketer and not only one merchant, but lots of different merchants, and kind of get an idea of how big this ecosystem is. How much money is flowing into the spam advertised pharmaceutical marketplace. So just as the last time, if we want to understand the revenue, we want to characterize this business, a few good questions to ask are going to be: how much money are these merchants making, and how many orders are they processing? And again, ideally, it'd be great if we had access to ground truth data. We could ask them, oh, hey, do you want to tell us some things so we can do some research? That unfortunately is not the case, but we can find some information leaks here. We can understand this from information that is available to us. So as part of what I was doing in this research, I was ordering a bunch of drugs online. And what I was able, so one of the first anecdotes I have here is that the customer service for this process is really, really good. You get multiple emails back from these people. You get sometimes they'll call you on the phone to make sure that you wanted to make that order. If the order doesn't get through customs, then they'll happily ship you a new one. If you decide, oh, I want my money back, I didn't like this, they'll happily give that back to you. And so just one aspect of this customer service was that we would get these emails that would keep us apprised of the process of our order. And so this was an email that I received after ordering from an individual pharmaceutical site. And I see, okay, I got this order number here, this 482,065. Later on the same day, I make another order from a different site. It looks completely different, but they're selling more or less the same drugs. It's a site that was advertised by a different marketer, but it's for the same back-end merchant. And so the same back-end merchant is going to use the same back-end customer service process and actually give me a new order number. This one is a little bit higher, 483,000 something. I come back the next month and I order from a completely different site here, but it's through the same merchant, and I receive another customer service email, and this one says, oh, here's your order number that has been incremented by a decent amount since the last time you ordered. And at this point, you can say, it's almost as if there's some back-end database where they have a row, or they have a counter that keeps track of what order number they're on, and they just increment that by 1 for every order that comes through. That makes sense. That's how I would implement it. So what we actually were able to do here was order a bunch of different drugs from a bunch of different places, and we could say, all right, well, we're just going to note what time we made that order and what order number we got back. And we're going to wait some amount of time, and then we're going to go back either to that same site or to another site advertised by the same merchant, or by a site that has the same merchant as their back end. And so regardless of who is doing the advertising or how they're doing the advertising, we're actually able to keep track of how many orders that individual merchant is processing over all of the affiliate marketers that they have sending advertisements on their behalf. And so the data set for this was about 150 different orders over the course of about 2 months. And what was really great about this was that 97% of all the spam in our data set, which was about 1 billion different emails, was advertising downloadable software. So they send you Microsoft Windows for like $25, and you give them the money and they let you download the software, and that works out. 97% of those emails were vulnerable to this order throughput inference, where we could actually take a look, not necessarily at the customer service email, but the URL that we got that was our download link actually included a field that was incremented by 1 for every order that they processed. And then about 2/3 of all the pharmaceutical spam that we saw was actually also vulnerable to this order throughput inference. Sometimes, like there was one really tricky one where they were incrementing the order number by 2 instead of by 1, and it was pretty funny. But eventually we realized, all those order numbers are even, right? And so we were actually able to take a look at a very large swath of all of these merchants and understand, how many orders are they receiving per unit time. Now that we have this understanding, we can take a look at number of order numbers, or the number of orders processed at each of these 10 different merchant programs. Here we see that at the low end, there's one of the smaller software sellers selling about 50 different orders per day. Up at the top end, you see almost 900 orders per day at the Ava Pharmacy merchant program, which is the one that we talked about in the previous section of this talk. And in general, you don't see anyone completely dominating this space. You have everyone's doing this healthy, a few hundred orders per day for the entire merchant program. Now, if we want to talk about revenue, we had this idea of how many orders they're taking per unit time, but we don't know how much money they're actually receiving per order. But if we can interpolate the information from the previous section of this talk, where we know what the demand distribution looks like, we can multiply out that demand distribution by what the prices are on a given site. We can actually come to a rough understanding of what the gross revenue is for that individual site. Now here, we don't know how many of these orders are actually successful. We don't know how many they ordered. We don't know whether they ordered 10 pills or 300 pills. And we don't know whether they ordered the super cheap 10 milligram version or the super XL, 150 milligram version. So there's a lot of caveats here, but wherever we had a chance to make a low end estimate, we did this so that we could try and come to an idea of what the lower bound would be for these merchants' gross revenue. And we came to an understanding of what the gross monthly revenue would be at each of these different merchant programs. And you can see that this is coming from anywhere around $200,000 of gross monthly revenue for that smaller software seller, all the way up to almost $2.5 million of gross monthly revenue for the Ava Pharmacy program. And specifically, if we take a look at RX Promotion, this is one of the merchant programs that actually had their real back-end database that kept track of all of their orders leaked to the public, and we were actually able to verify that our estimate in this work using order throughput inference was within a small constant factor of the actual ground truth data. So that gave us a little bit of positive feedback on whether or not our methodology was able to accurately reflect how much money that these guys were bringing in at this point in time. Now, this is all well and good. It's very interesting to understand what's going on here, but how can we use this information to better understand what's going on and how we can prevent these problems from surfacing? How can we fight spam by knowing how much money they're making? So not only do we know how much money they were making our purchases using specially instrumented credit cards that allowed us to see what bank was processing the transaction on the merchant side. So we basically got to see what bank is taking these transactions on behalf of the spamming merchant. And so of the billion different email advertisements that we analyzed, we mapped 95% of all of those advertisements back to just 3 different banks taking those transactions for all of these different merchant programs. And so actually going after their bottom line by trying to combat this at the bank level as opposed to at a certain technical level, we're able to create this really effective defense where we can identify this simply by making a purchase. If they don't want to be identified, then they can't take purchases. So this is really, really great. And where a typical technical defense, for instance, say spam filtering. So say you come up with this awesome spam filter, 100% accurate. It's able to stop all spam that's being sent today. Well, that's great, but if the bad guy who's already sitting at his desk twiddles a little bit about what his spam messages look like or where they're getting sent from, all of your effort in creating this amazing spam filter is going to be discounted because the attacker has been able to very easily move on to some other strategy. if you look at this on this bank side, it goes from a very different situation where, oh, they just had to change a little bit of their technical operation to, if you kick them off of a certain bank, which they're not allowed, these banks are not allowed by Visa to take these transactions. If they get kicked off of this bank, they're going to lose 60 to 90 days of revenue based on their contract with the bank and with Visa. They're going to have to find a new bank to actually process their transactions, and that's not something that you can do sitting at your desk. You've actually got to create a relationship with a bank, with a banker in real life, and that takes a lot more time. It's a lot more expensive for the bad guy to fight this defense, and it's much easier for us to just buy some drugs online and identify who the bank is. So this provides us with an effective defense mechanism for this technical problem, but by fully understanding both the technical and the non-technical aspects of why these spammers are actually doing what they're doing. So this is a technical and data-driven approach to computer security that's taking into account the attacker motivations by looking at things from their point of view. This lets us create long-term effective defenses. And what I'd like to do a little bit of future work is take a look at not only spamming as a way to make money, but I'd also like to take a look at stealing financial credentials, say bank account logins or credit card numbers, and take a look at, okay, we understand that they can steal these, and in many cases it's not too hard to steal a credit card number, but if we better understand how they actually pull that value out at scale, we'd be able to create more effective defenses in this way by, again, taking into account their point of view and their, in many cases, financial motivations. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be very happy to take any questions. Yes?
So you were talking about the Dns Based Blacklisting.
Yes.
Have you seen any of these botnets, let's say, so you're talking about the DNS based blacklisting. Have you seen any of these bots or the proxy bots trying to verify if their own IP is a part of the blacklist?
So the question, just in case the mic didn't pick it up, is whether or not we saw the proxy bots try to self-determine if they were part of the blacklist. And we did not actually see that happen. Most of the time, when we did see this type of checking, we saw this happening in a centralized fashion. So they would submit their own email address, as I was saying, to have mail sent to it, and then they would check it themselves. We didn't see this type of checking happening on the end host. There was connectivity checking, so whether or not they were being black holed, they would actually be able to test for that. We were able to iterate our own process and convince them that they were actually sending these messages out. In theory, there should be no way for us to effectively always be able to circumvent their tests, right? They could come up with better ways. They could use public key crypto. They could use some other needle in a haystack type testing, but in practice, we didn't really see that happening, and we did our best to take advantage of it.
Do you see that a possibility on that line? The reason I ask is there is a line of research that I'm working on in that specific area. That's one of the reasons. If there is a possibility in that, the bots itself verifying if IP it is on is a part of the blacklist or not.
Yeah, I definitely see that as an interesting question to try to answer. We haven't seen it in the wild, but that would be one avenue. Yes?
Just wondering, since you said there is definitely some conversion happening here.
Beg your pardon?
There is definitely some converging happening here, as your data showed. So I'm just wondering, did you, as part of the research that you've been doing, thought of any ways to improve the current spam filters to have a better detection to also minimize the conversion rate and possibly make it less effective for them to pursue that way of marketing?
Yes, so our Botnet Judo work was aimed specifically at botnet-based spam campaigns, because this is where you can actually create the amount of volume that you need to run, for instance, an effective, a profitable spam campaign, because if you have a botnet, you can send such a large amount of spam. So our defense specifically targeted only that spam that was being sent by botnets. That's the stuff that's really going to be cost effective for the bad guys. And so our defense sort of implicitly takes that into consideration because it is aimed specifically at combating botnet-based spam campaigns, if that makes sense. So we can't explicitly take into consideration, how they're making money on the spam detection side. We haven't really come up with some idea to do that, but our techniques are implicitly taking that into consideration by going after these profitable ways to send spam. Thank you. Okay.
So if you could just come for one